All right. Here, we will be talking about acute bronchitis. Bronchitis is nothing but the inflammatory condition of the tracheobronchial tree, right? And it can also manifest as laryngotracheobronchitis, like just like croup-like it has croup-like symptoms in it. Okay, in this, what happens in this inflammation, here the mucous membranes of the respiratory tract are edematous. They are swollen, inflamed, and there are increased bronchial secretions, increased mucus production, and later on the manifestations are because of this, because of the edema and this increased bronchial secretions. It is also associated with cough and pointer. All right. It is also associated with cough, and there's another important feature of this is there's no infection in the lower respiratory tract. And apart from this, this most commonly occurs in the winter months. Here we are just giving an overview of bronchitis. We will be talking about bronchiolitis more. Here the causative, there are number of causative agents of bronchitis, including many viruses. Normally the viruses causing common cold like influenza adenoviruses. There are many other viruses involved. Apart from viruses, there are certain bacterial causes also, like main causative agent being Bordetella pertussis, followed by Mycoplasma and Chlamydophila pneumoniae. All right. Apart from this, certain bacteria, they cause secondary infections like Streptococcus pneumoniae and Haemophilus influenzae. Apart from that, Moraxella catarrhalis is another important pathogen, which is a gram-negative Diplococcus. I'll show you the picture of it. If you remember Neisseria gonorrhoeae, it looks like that. Here it is. Bean-shaped, kidney-shaped, gram-negative Diplococci. Now that was just an overview on bronchitis. We will be talking about bronchiolitis. What is bronchiolitis? It is nothing but an acute viral lower respiratory tract illness. All right, and this is very common in infants and children within 2 years of age. First 2 years are very crucial. Almost every infant gets affected by this in his lifetime, and then certain time reinfection is also common. Now, this infection is characterized by acute onset of wheeze, hyperaerated lungs, and it is associated with other respiratory symptoms like cough, rhinorrhea, tachypnea, and respiratory distress. Do you know what is rhinorrhea? Yes, dear. Yes, rhinorrhea is nothing but running nose. These are the characteristic features of bronchiolitis. Let's talk about the causative agents, which include predominantly caused by respiratory syncytial virus, which causes around 70% of the total number of cases, followed by parainfluenza viruses type 1, 2, and 3. Other viruses included are human metapneumovirus, human Boca virus, and certain other viruses like adenovirus, influenza virus. These are the causative agents of bronchiolitis. Let's talk a little bit about the respiratory syncytial virus. As the name in its name itself, it says the pathogenesis, respiratory syncytial. Do you have an idea what is a syncytium? I'm sure you have an idea, isn't it? What is a syncytium? Multiple cells. Syncytium means it will club or it will mold or it will attach the all in uninfected cells and it will form a syncytium. That is the cytopathogenic effect of this virus. If you remember in general virology, the cytopathogenic effect. So the CPE of this virus is formation of syncytia. Right. So talking about morphology of this virus, it is an enveloped virus, single-stranded negative sense RNA virus, right? And it has certain proteins, attachment proteins on its surface, like fusion, F and G proteins. F stands for fusion. These are basically fusion proteins which are present on the surface. They help the attachment of virus to the host cell. Okay. Talking about the fusion protein, what it does, it initiates the attachment and the penetration of the virus. Okay, and it starts. I will later on show you in the next slide the diagrammatic representation of this. Right now, I'll just explain. This F protein will initiate fusing of this viral cell with the other cells, with the other cell membranes. Okay, and then it forms syncytia. Talking about G protein, it is also a viral attachment protein, and it also mediates the attachment of this virus to the host cells. This virus was first isolated, the natural infection, it is limited to humans and chimpanzees, and this virus was first isolated in 1950s in chimpanzees. All right, here you can see. Let me zoom it. These are the cells, the virus cell, and these are the proteins on it, viral attachment proteins on the surface of the virus, fusion proteins, and these are the host cell receptors. These are the receptors for attachment. Now the virus attaches to these receptors slowly. You can see the virus is completely surrounded by the host cells. Now this virus attaches to them completely, and at the end it forms a syncytium like this. It will completely combine the cells. It will fuse the cells and it forms a syncytium. This is the morphological structure of the respiratory syncytial virus. It is a single-stranded virus enveloped with the proteins here, F protein, G protein, with a lipid envelope on it. Talking about pathogenesis, how it causes this infection. First, we will start with the incubation period. It is around 3 to 5 days. Now, this virus enters the human body through nose and eyes, and this is a aerosol infection. It is spread through large particle aerosols. After it enters the human body through nose or eye, what it does, it binds to the epithelial cells of the respiratory tract. They are ciliated epithelial cells, isn't it? So it binds to the ciliated epithelial cells of respiratory tract, and it attaches to the cellular receptors present on the cells, okay, which are present for the attachment of the virus. Now, slowly, once it attaches to one particular cell, and slowly it spreads to other uninfected cells, and it forms syncytia, as we have seen in the previous slide. First, it will attach to one cell. From there, it will attach to another cell. Like this, from cell to cell, this virus is spread. After this, what it does, it causes local tissue damage, it causes proliferation, it causes necrosis of the epithelium. Okay, so now this necrosis, the necrosed tissue, the damaged tissue is sloughed off. As this is the infection of children, we all know children have this narrow airway passages, isn't it? They are very narrow, very tiny. Hence, then this necrosis or sloughed off epithelium, it is shed off. Now the lumens of bronchioles are blocked. Completely they are blocked with this sloughed material. Okay, and apart from this, there is a lot of mucus secretion also. So this becomes a major breathing problem in the infant. Just imagine, infant's respiratory tract is so small, the tubules are so small, in that if this all debris is present, just imagine how a child can breathe. So this is the main pathogenic mechanism. I hope you understood. So basically, the immune response normally in viruses, what we see is cell-mediated immunity. But here we will see more of a humoral immune response rather than cell-mediated. This also correlates with the increased wheezing sound, the rattles, wheeze, what we see in the patient, and also high level of inflammation. And apart from that, this the type of response what we get from the patient is, it is also dependent on certain factors like age of the patients, definitely the genetics, and if the patient has had any previous infection with this specific virus and its antigens, etc., etc. All these factors, the antibody, sorry, immune response depends on all these factors. In this, the reinfections are very common. Here, if you see in this diagram, I'll show you how the difference between a normal bronchiole and how the inflamed or infected bronchiole looks like. This is a normal bronchial tree. If you can see the smooth muscles bronchiole, the branch of the bronchiole, and these air sacs called as alveoli. We all have read anatomy, isn't it? You know this very well. Now, when you see the inflamed bronchiole or bronchial tree, it looks something like this. Here, the necrosis and inflamed tissue, completely inflamed, swollen, the production of mucus, it completely blocks this bronchiole. Okay, if you can see the smooth muscles, how they have been tightened around the bronchiole, and the alveoli, certain alveoli are collapsed as they cannot take the pressure, and certain alveoli are hyperinflated due to the air trapped in them. Here, in a patient of RSV, you will see this. In the radiological examination, you can see hyperaerated lungs here. It will show translucent. This is translucent, isn't it? Translucency on X-ray. Hyperinflated, hyperaerated means hyperinflated or increased lung volume because of trapped air inside. And you will also see intercostal retraction. If you can see this picture, the retracted intercostal muscles, because of which the patient's chest will appear like this. This is known as intercostal retraction. Here, let's talk about clinical manifestations. Clinical manifestations, as we have told, the incubation period, it takes around 4 to 5 days for the virus to establish infection. It will typically start with upper respiratory symptoms. Normally, in any upper respiratory infection, how it starts, this starts in the same, like nasal congestion, fever, cough, infection of pharynx, sore throat, followed by pneumonia and bronchiolitis. These are the most common recognized disease, which is seen in around 30 to 70% of primary infections. These are characterized by wheeze, rhonchi, rales on examination, infiltrates on the chest X-ray. Apart from this, The lower respiratory tract involvement, it also manifests with certain other symptoms like dyspnea, increased respiratory rate, hyperaerated lungs, intercostal retraction. And if the child has certain other, uh, one second, I'll get back to you. If the child has any other underlying disorder, or if the person has, I mean, if they're immunocompromised, then the situation will be something else. It will be more severe. Now, this virus, it also can cause certain another complication, like it might affect the ear. It replicates in the middle ear, and it might also cause otitis media. These infections, they are also seen in adults. It manifests just like any other cold flu-like illness, and then it disappears. But certain elderly and immunocompromised adults, it might give a serious blow. Yes, somebody asked me what are rails, isn't it? Rails are nothing but on examination of this respiratory patient, you will get a rattling sound. How can I tell you rattling sound? Like clicking, or here, like this, little bit. This is more. Can you hear the sound I made? The person who asked me about rails. Yes, it's like a small clicking sound. When you hear the person with stethoscope, you will get this sound. That was about the respiratory, okay, respiratory syncytial virus. Now, how do we diagnose it? Normally, when you see the patient, if it is an adult, I've told you, it looks like a common cold or flu. But if we want to diagnose it by laboratory techniques, then the preferred specimen is nasal wash. Okay. Now we do a direct antigen test, that is, apart from the direct fluorescent antibody or ELISA test of these respiratory specimens, which is sensitive, very sensitive. Apart from this, we can go for tissue culture also. We can grow the virus. The virus takes around a week to grow, and it will show the cytopathogenic effect in tissue culture. That is formation of syncytia. It will show the, in the culture, in the laboratory, we can see the syncytia formation, how the cells are fused with one another. Okay, this is how we can isolate the virus, and definitely we can also do this with PCR. Talking about the treatment, normally if the symptoms are mild, according to symptoms we proceed. If the symptoms are mild, otherwise healthy individual, then only supportive treatment is given. Supportive treatment means symptomatic. Whatever the symptom the patient is showing, you will treat that symptom only, if otherwise healthy person. Other than that, the treatment available for this is ribavirin. Ribavirin is given in severely ill patients. That too, it is given in nebulized form, ribavirin. And there's no vaccine available till now. All right, let's talk about the other one now. All right, yeah. So that was about the bronchiolitis and respiratory syncytial virus. Now we are going to talk about another disease, which is whooping cough. Whooping cough, first it should remind you of a child. Whooping cough is a childhood infection basically. And why it is called as whooping cough? Because it is characterized by a typical whoop. What is a whoop? I will tell you. I will show you. Actually, I'll make a sound and show you. It is a typical episode of cough a person will be having. And if it is a child, when you see that child with whooping cough, you will be so frightened because it is very severe. It's like this. It consists of short expiratory bursts like this, followed by inspiratory gasp. That means, you know, long rush of air inside the lung. Okay, this is a complete episode of cough. Continuously, the patient will be coughing. Just imagine a small child coughing like this continuously per a day, at least 30, around 30 to 35 episodes of cough that patient will have. So, this is called as a characteristic whoop. That is the reason this infection is named as whooping cough. And this is highly contagious disease. The causative agent is Bordetella pertussis, which is a strict human pathogen. Talking a little bit about Bordetella pertussis, what it is, what are its morphological and cultural features. Now, this is a very tiny gram-negative Coccobacillus. It is non-motile, it is non-invasive, and it is extracellular organism. And it is a toxin producer. The toxin is the main pathogenic feature of this organism. This Bordetella is actually capsulated, but it loses its capsule on subsequent subcultures. This is a strict aerobic bacillus. Apart from this, it cannot be grown on a routine culture media. It is a fastidious organism. That means it requires lot of special nutrients for its growth. It cannot be grown on a routine blood agar, chocolate, I mean blood agar, nutrient agar. These culture media, on this culture media, it cannot be grown. It needs a special transport medium for its survival. Once it is transported, it needs a special medium, that is boarded Gengu medium, for its growth, and it will take around 5 to 7 days to grow. Okay, and this boarded Gengu medium, the name it is given is because the scientists who discovered this bacillus are Bordet and Gengu. Around in 1950s something, they have isolated this bacilli, hence it is named as Bordet Gengu. Here, if you can see, tiny, tiny Coccobacilli. Yeah, these are gram-negative Coccobacilli. Talking about pathogenicity, pathogenicity here basically it is multifactorial. There are a number of factors in this bacteria which leads to its pathogenic mechanism. Mainly being it, what it does is it evades the host defenses definitely, and it tries to escape from phagocytosis. These are the Definitely, these are the main things a bacteria, virus, whichever pathogen has. This is their main target, isn't it? To survive within the host body. So, this is what they do. Now, how they do it, we are going to talk about it. Here, what it does, it causes local tissue damage and avoid rapid clearance by phagocytes. Starting with filamentous hemagglutinin. Filamentous hemagglutinin is nothing but a surface component which is in the bacteria. In the next slide, inshallah, I'll show you the picture of it. Now, this filamentous hemagglutinin, it mainly acts by attaching the bacteria to the respiratory epithelial cells, which are ciliated epithelial cells. Okay, mainly it helps in attachment of the organism. Not only FHA, not only filamentous hemagglutinin. Apart from this, there are a few other structures which also help in their attachment to the attachment of bacteria to the host cells. Those structures are pertussis toxin, pertactin, and many other. Here, this is the bacterial cell. These are the receptors. These are the surface components of the bacteria. Hemagglutinin, pertussis toxin, pertactin, the components which help in attachment of bacteria to the surface of the cell. Here, if you can see the glycolipid receptors on the cell. This is the host cell, isn't it? Epithelial cell. So this bacteria gets attached by these receptors on the ciliated epithelial cells. If you can see, this pertussis toxin is typical AB toxin. Can you tell me the basic mechanism of AB toxin, please? What it has in one word, if you can tell me. Anyone? It has two subunits, isn't it? A and B. Yes, anyway, we will talk about it here. So that was about filamentous hemagglutinin, which helps in attachment. Followed by pertussis toxin. Pertussis toxin is nothing but it is produced only by Bordetella pertussis. I mean, Bordetella has many other species apart from pertussis, but only pertussis produces this toxin, hence the name. And this toxin is a typical AB toxin. AB toxin, if you remember from our general part, it has two subunits, isn't it? A unit, B unit. A, which is enzymatically active. If you remember, this is a revision for you. A is enzymatically active subunit, whereas B is binding subunit. Yeah. Now this acts by adhesion. It binds to the receptors. I've shown you in the previous picture. It binds to the receptors on the ciliated epithelial cell. After binding, it does certain things. It ribosylates the host cell G protein, which leads to increase in the CAMP levels, production of CAMP, which in turn, what it does, it interferes with cell signaling pathways. This is the main pathogenic mechanism. It interferes with the cell signaling pathways, which in turn leads to many other systemic manifestations. What are they? We are going to talk about it. Apart from this, it also acts as an adjuvant. It will enhance certain immunological responses. It also inhibits killing by phagocytosis and also the monocyte migration. Hence, it evades the host immune response. Apart from this, this has multiple functions, okay? Apart from this, it also blocks the return of T and B cells. Please remember, this is very important. It results in the lymphocytosis. Lymphocytosis is the very important feature of whooping cough. When the patient comes and when we detect lymphocytosis, this gives a very important clue for the disease. Hence, pertussis toxin is also known as lymphocytosis producing factor because it produces high amount of lymphocytes, causing lymphocytosis. So lymphocytosis in the blood, when we detect, it is very important clue for this disease. What it does, it causes this pulmonary hypertension in the infants and also leads to increased vascular resistance. I've told you before that it causes interference in the cell signaling pathways, isn't it? So that interference, it leads to certain systemic manifestations like it sensitizes to the effects of histamine. Hence, it is also known as histamine sensitizing factor. This pertussis toxin has these names because it does this, sensitizes to effects of histamine. Apart from that, it also enhances the insulin secretion. Hence, it is known as islet activating protein. Okay, islet activating protein because it secretes insulin. It enhances producing insulin. That was about pertussis toxin. It is a heat labile toxin, and the toxoid form of this pertussis toxin and filamentous hemagglutinin. These are used as a component of acellular vaccine. Now talking about annihilate cyclase toxin, it also has number of functions, multiple functions, and it acts in a similar way to the pertussis toxin. Like it is also A and B toxin, so it will do the same thing. It will, A will be the active side, B will be the binding side, and this way it enters into the cells and it produces the CAMP. It also inhibits the leukocyte migration, and it also inhibits phagocytosis. It escapes from the phagocytes. It causes local tissue damage, and it interferes with the other immune cell functions. It also enhances or increases mucus production and evades most of the host defenses. It acts basically in a similar way to pertussis toxin. I don't know. This got stuck. Now followed by tracheal cytotoxin. This tracheal cytotoxin, it is produced by the peptidoglycan. It is produced as a byproduct of peptidoglycan synthesis. How it acts is it induces this nitric oxide synthesis, and it basically causes local tissue damage. It completely interferes with the DNA synthesis, and it damages the host cells. It causes ciliastasis. Ciliastasis means these are the respiratory cells, isn't it? These are all ciliated epithelial cells. Hence, it will completely, what to say, stops the cilia. It will not allow the cilia to move. When the cilia are not moving, there are many functions cilia does, isn't it? They clear off all the impurities, slough, everything. But when the cilia is like that, not moving, so all those functions are stayed back like that. So it causes ciliastasis and ultimate death of the cells. They also stimulate the release of interleukins, which are fever producing, and they are responsible for localized tissue damage and the cough of pertussis. The typical cough I told you, expiratory burst followed by a inspiratory gasp. Now there's another toxin, dermonecrotic toxin. It results in the smooth muscle this contraction, which results in local ischemia. Here is the tabulated form of the whooping cough. What we have explained just now, it is tabulated in this, the same thing. Now, let's talk about the clinical manifestations. How it starts. The classic pertussis, classic whooping cough in young children, normally it is divided into different phases. It is divided into 4 phases. Yes, yes, dear. Aerosol means these are small, tiny particles which are suspended in the air. Okay, when we talk, when we sneeze, these particles they enter into the air and it is spread like that. Tiny particles, very tiny there. Anyway, where were we? Yeah. Clinical manifestations are into different phases, starting with incubation period, which is around 1 to 3 weeks. This is the first phase, that is incubation period. Followed by Kitterhall phase. Kitterhall phase is the, contagious phase. When the infection is taking on a rise, it is initiation. Here what happens, the symptoms appear that of a upper respiratory tract infection, and it lasts, all these phases they last around 2 weeks. Hence, the whole disease is of 6 to 8 weeks. Remember this. Every phase is around 2 weeks. Okay. In this non-productive, still the mucus is not that much produced. Hence, the cough is non-productive and dry. This catarrhal phase is followed by paroxysmal phase. Please remember these names, then you can easily remember what happens in that particular phase. As the name says, paroxysmal phase. In this phase is typically characterized by the typical cough of pertussis. As I've told you, the typical cough paroxysm of pertussis is seen in this paroxysmal phase. Okay, and it occurs most commonly in children, but in infants and adults it is not that common. It is present, but in children it is more common. Around in a day, in 24 hours, more than 30 episodes, 30 to 40 episodes of this typical cough can be seen, and this cough is so severe, it will result in certain other manifestations like cyanosis and post-tussive vomiting. Post-tussive vomiting means once the patient stops coughing, immediately he vomits. Tussive means cough. Tussive, the meaning of tussive is cough. So post-tussive, the moment he stops the cough paroxysm, he vomits. So this is one of the characteristic feature of pertussis. This also lasts around 2 weeks. Sometimes it might be extended. Now, this paroxysmal phase is followed by convalescent phase. Here, the disease is on a low rise, it's decreasing, the intensity decreases, frequency of cough decreases, patient, he's getting better. That was about the different phases of infection. Now, what about the secondary infections? As we have discussed before, this virus also replicates it might spread into and replicate into the middle ear, causing otitis media, and it might also cause pneumonia, like aspiration pneumonia. As I've told you, this cough is very severe due to the physical pressure of that cough. For example, when we are coughing, we are creating pressure inside, isn't it? If the cough is normal, okay, it is not of much importance. But here the cough is so severe because of that physical pressure. The sequelae are sometimes we can see conjunctival hemorrhages, tiny hemorrhagic spots present on the conjunctiva. Sometimes the patient might bleed through his nose. Sometimes they might develop into hernia and a rectal prolapse. That was about physical pressure. Talking about anoxic sequelae, that is oxygen, a reduced oxygen supply. Due to that, the patient might land into encephalopathy, seizures. Later on, if it is so severe, the patient might enter coma. That was in general about the phases of infection, how it presents. Now let's talk about this particular pertussis in infants, how it presents in the infants. Infants, it is a little less typical presentation, not exactly what we have described in children. It might be of little lesser intensity, or even the whoop might be little less. And apart from this, these infants, they can present this infection with gagging. You know what is gagging? Before vomiting, we do like that, isn't it? That is gagging, the vomiting reflex. So the infants may present with gagging, vomiting, or sometimes gasping. Cyanosis might appear, and also apnea. Definitely, age is the highest risk of this disease. Uh, at which age the patient is infected, the severity of disease depends on that. And if you remember, if we go back to pathogenesis, uh, I've told you the same thing, isn't it? Age, it depends on age of the patient. Now, this was about in infants. Talking about pertussis in adolescents and adults. Here, in adolescents and adults, especially in the individuals who have waning immunity. Waning means lesser immunity. In this here, you will see pertussis in those kind of patients. They present with a cough, post-tussive vomiting, not very frequent, but sometimes, yes, post-tussive vomiting, and other less common symptoms. It is relatively mild in adults and adolescents when you compare it with children. Coming about diagnosis, lab diagnosis is actually secondary, not always preferred, because the clinical symptoms, if they are very, I mean, striking, the clinician need not go for the laboratory detection. Clinical suspicion is enough, and a history of cough of more than 2 weeks duration with this typical whoop. So, and leukocytosis with predominance of lymphocytosis, I've told you before, isn't it? If these features are present, this is enough for the diagnosis of the patient. And when I was talking about morphology, I've told you culture of this. The bordetella cannot be grown on normal culture, routine culture media. It has to have a special culture media for transportation and also for culture. That means, in short, it requires a lot of time if we go for a laboratory detection. Apart from that, definitely PCR techniques are available. So PCR is faster than all these methods. Talking about treatment, supportive care is very important. And apart from the symptomatic treatment, we give them macrolides to kill the organism and also to decrease the severity of disease. As soon as as soon as the patient comes, you must start the treatment. It is most effective, the treatment becomes more effective when it is started in early stage of infection. Here we have a vaccine also, we all know. For pertussis we have a vaccine which is DTaP for children, Tdap for adolescents and adults. Apart from this, antibiotic prophylaxis, we give azithromycin. And also trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole for 14 days to the close contacts for them not to take up the infection. Here, that was in very detail about pertussis. I will give just an overview about the other viruses. First is parainfluenza virus, which is, we all know, RNA virus, negative sense, single stranded virus. Pathogenesis of this virus, it has hemagglutinin and neuraminidase proteins on it, isn't it? If you remember the structure of parainfluenza virus, it also has fusion proteins. Apart from fusion proteins, it has this hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Clinical features, it shows the symptoms of upper respiratory tract infection, the common symptoms, whatever we see. Apart from that, it is a cause of croup, that is laryngotracheobronchitis. And the diagnosis is always clinical. Treatment is supportive. Apart from supportive treatment, we also give them aerosolized steroids. All right, that was parainfluenza virus. Apart from that, human metapneumovirus. This is an enveloped single-stranded RNA virus, negative sense. It has fusion and glycoproteins. Okay, and if you remember what fusion protein and glycoprotein does, in children, the symptoms, they range from upper respiratory tract infection symptoms to pneumonia. It might lead to pneumonia as well. And in adults, it is milder form. It might just leave the adult patient with common cold. That's it. Treatment is again supportive in this. Boca virus, single-stranded DNA virus. It infects respiratory tract and gastrointestinal tract. This is the distinguishing feature of Boca virus. This is the only virus which infects apart from respiratory. It also infects the gastrointestinal tract. Hence, clinical features will involve respiratory tract as well as GI tract. That is, it also causes diarrhea. We can detect it with PCR and the treatment is supported. We finish our lectures. If you want to take this quiz,